So I can't recall exactly if I was asked by one of the people who watches this channel or not. I was working under the assumption that I would be responding to somebody who'd asked for this video, but now I can't find the comment, so I don't know. But there was a request for me to make some recommendations for books, I think. If not, I'm just producing it anyway. And so, one of the things I actually discovered is that despite the fact that my Goodreads has over 200 books on it, I couldn't actually recall that many books that I thought could be read more than once. There are certain books that, for certain things, are very useful that you could read more than once. But not something that everybody, without exception, could read more than once. And that even applies to this list here to some extent. But I decided that regardless of that, I would produce a video on the top 5 books that everybody should read at least twice. Because you know the quality of a book when you can read it twice. The first book I'm going to recommend is probably fairly obvious, and I think it's at the top of every Christian's reading list. But I would suggest this for absolutely everybody. Atheists, Muslims, Jews, what have you. And that is the Catholic canon of Bible. All of the books are worth reading more than once, of course. But there are 2 specific sections that I want to focus on, and that is the Gospels and the wisdom literature of the Old Testament. All of these books are very useful for living life, from everything from business through to, relationships, through to just your own internal life. These 73 books are really, really important, and they should be the basis of everyone's life. But I mention especially the Gospels and the wisdom literature because I believe that they are, first of all, the easiest to understand, and second of all, because the wisdom in them is often immediately applicable, right? So, for example, you can read a passage out of, say, the book of Sirach or Proverbs, and it will be immediately applicable to your life in a lot of cases. And it will always have deeper meaning to it, which means that you can sit and think and meditate on these things at great length. So, I would really recommend that you read all of the wisdom literature. For those Protestants who are listening, or those who are only familiar with the King James, right, there are actually more wisdom books in the Catholic canon than there are in the Protestant canon. So in the Protestant canon, you have the Psalms, you have Job, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Songs. Whereas in the Catholic wisdom literature, you have at least 2 more books. You have Sirach, which is probably my favourite of them, and the Book of Wisdom, which is just... Actually, I lie. I think maybe... Sirach is a more easily applicable book than Wisdom, but Wisdom is the basis for a great amount of theology if you're interested in that sort of thing. I'd say the Gospels as well, because these Gospels, they often reproduce the same sort of content that can advise a person, as well as giving context and direct testament to who Jesus was, who is, regardless of how you slice it, the single most significant human person to ever live. Of course, being God as well. And to not know this person, I don't care if you're an atheist or a Jew or whatever, is to be ignorant of history. So, there you go. The second book that I would legitimately recommend to almost everybody, with the exception of Jews, because they would likely take offence at this book, is The Dialogue with Trypho by St. Justin Martyr. This is a dialogue between one of the early church fathers, St. Justin Martyr, who was writing in the middle of the 2nd century AD, and a Jew of around the same time. For those Jews who are watching and are curious, this was before the Mishnah was compiled, so this was before Talmudic Judaism came about. But the purpose of this work is to give exposition to, effectively, even if you don't care, it shows the difference between Jewish and Christian thinking. And also, I think, particularly for the Christian, it provides a lot of context on the Old Testament that a lot of people aren't aware of, as well as refuting a lot of the kind of silly points that Trypho makes, which are also replicated at certain times in other places as well. I recall that St. Thomas Aquinas claims in his commentary on Isaiah that the Jews will typically recognize the child, or this is one of the views of the Jews, will recognize the child born to the maiden in Isaiah chapter 7 as Hezekiah sometimes. But this is another one that's replicated in there. It also provides, I think, maybe not in the most complete way, but it provides one of the more interesting accounts of Trinitarianism in the Old Testament I've seen. Rather, maybe not Trinitarianism, but the divinity of Jesus from the Old Testament. So I think that this is a fairly short read. It's probably the most overlooked of the three works that Justin Martyr has generally attributed to him. The first and second apology tend to be more important, or considered more important by people, but I think that the dialogue with Trypho is something that everyone should read at least twice. The third book that everybody should read, and I include now Jews under this category, is Humility of Heart by Father Cajetan Mary de Bergamo. Now, this is one of the most intense books on humility that I've ever read. It's a very spicy book, and it's a very powerful book, and it might actually hurt a lot of people if they read it too quickly, because it is very powerful. But I do think that while we live in a time where even seemingly secular people, secular authors like Jocko Willink, are recommending humility, that there is something lacking in the teaching of humility, and that's because it lacks context of what man actually is. We live in a secular world that has a number of scientific assumptions which don't really cover all of reality, whereas Humility of Heart is willing to go a lot further and touch the soul of the person reading it. I think that even secular people should read this if they can tolerate the fact that Father Cajetan constantly quotes from the Church Fathers and from various theologians to make his point. I think that particularly Jews and Muslims, if they can get over the references to Christ, will find this book to be particularly profitable, because otherwise it is very much in line with the ethos provided by the Abrahamic religions. It assumes throughout it that God created everything from nothing. In fact, this is one of the key assumptions of the work. Either way, even if you're secular, I think that you should read this book at least twice. The fourth book that I would recommend that absolutely everybody reads at least twice, and implements this in their life, I might add, is called Spiritual Friendship by St. Aelred of Rievaulx. This is a 3-book treatise by a monk from the north of England, and he wrote this in the 12th century AD, and it's about how to properly approach friendships, the types of friendships, the ways of testing people to see if they'll be a good friend, and so on and so forth. It's based on an earlier work by Cicero called On Friendship, I believe it's called, but it adds a lot more Christian influence and influence from the scriptures. I found it very beautiful the first time I read it. My now spiritual director lent it to me, and I spent around about an hour reading it. It's quite a short work, but I found it to be really in touch with something that a lot of people are lacking. A lot of people aren't very good with friendships, and we live in a world which I suspect, as he had thought, has always been very socially tense with rivalries and things like that, and sometimes it's necessary for people to take a break from all of that. Sometimes people need to take a break from corporate war waging, or perhaps stress inside of the family if there are issues. And one way of doing that is through a friendship. And Aelred of Rievaulx, borrowing from Cicero, makes a very good case, not only for what good friendships are, but he also provides very interesting instructions on how to discern those. The fifth and final book that I'm going to recommend be read more than twice, and frankly this should be carried around by every single academic on the entire planet, for constant daily reference is The Intellectual Life by Father A.C. Sertalanger. While it is written from a Christian and specifically Catholic point of view, the priest was a Dominican monk. This book is a book that I wish I'd discovered, I don't know, whenever I'd been prepared to read it, probably the day after my conversion. And it provides some superb advice on how to properly study, how to properly take notes, how to properly read, how to properly manage sleep and eat, so that you can better think your way around life. If you are even in the business of reading, then you should read this book, right? If you are here, sitting, listening, deciding that you're going to read a book, if you take nothing else away besides the Bible, I would say go and read A.C. Sertalanger's Intellectual Life. Because it really is that much of a game changer, right? You have all of these modern self-help books, and in fact, while I was trying to decide what was going to go into this list, it struck me that I'd read a lot of these books and that most of them were effectively useless compared with the Catholic spiritual books and just generally reading the Bible. Reading this book is going to completely change the way that you think about study, which is something that everyone should engage in for at least some part of their life, because you're going to need that wisdom at some point, and it teaches you how to do it efficiently and effectively. So, seriously, keep that book on side. I'm actually keeping that book on my desk, even though I finished it once already, just so I can at some point go back and read it a second time, hopefully sooner rather than later. But seriously, if you're going to take any book here, besides the Bible, take that book. So that's a very short video on my top 5 books that you should read more than twice. I have got a new schedule now that I've finished my master's degree for content that I'm going to produce for this channel and potentially for another one in future. And so you should see more uploads here, but that entirely depends on how I'm able to crank out ideas and how stuff works after this degree. Thank you very much for watching.